I read the story that was in the Jewish thing.
Living Jewish.
Yeah, very, very beautiful. And not only that, I repeated it in my sikha.
Okay.
I chazered your story.
Well, for sure.
I added a few things.
He's a very good guy. Isis was a very good guy. Nice guy.
Yeah, it was very, very powerful story. Anyway, Erdana Vayeira. Erdana, this mimer, the second mimer in Vayeira, is really a continuation of the first one. The first one, Patach Eliyahu. Why do we read Patach Eliyahu? Which is part of the introduction to the Tikkunei Zohar. Right. We read it every Friday night. In a certain sense, it's like a saying that on Shabbos you should be involved in something a little bit higher than just Nigla. It's saying, like, learn some Zohar.
Okay.
But to learn Zohar, you have to understand the basic concept. And the basic concept is that there is a process of Hashem bringing His light down into vessels. There are vessels, not just light.
Okay.
The biggest problem
That's one of the basic concepts.
Okay, it's a basic concept after you make it into a basic concept. But before people had this basic concept, the notion, imagine 500 years ago, before Kabbalah became well known, before Pnimis Torah became better known, the concept of a vessel that went with Hashem's light was very distant from people. They didn't understand it. So the Mekubalim in Tzfat, they decided that we'll add the Patach Eliyahu. And the Patach Eliyahu really is a page-and-a-half summary of the whole process of three worlds that are called Akudim, Nekudim, Vrudim. Won't get into them, but the big difference between them is what kind of vessels they have. And there's a long, long explanation of the Patach Eliyahu in the Mittler Rebbe, where he takes the same concepts that Kabbalah talks about, and he of course applies them to the psyche. And then you end up with a beautiful picture of man, of every human being, having three sets of vessels. And these vessels are not just the process of maturation, that you, as you become older, your vessels become better. So when you're a child, the image is like of the world of Akudim, where all the light was in one vessel. So even though you had all the potential, because you didn't have separate vessels, there was no way for your speech to be differentiated from your hearing, from your motion, from your thinking. Everything was sort of like you see in a child, in a baby, that everything is there, but it all has one vessel, so there's no way for it to come into, to be reflected, to be manifested in life. So that's what the first mimer deals with, and he explains it according to Chassidus. And again, he doesn't go very far here, but he does a lot of the work of translating it into the psyche. The real place that it's done is in his son's work, that he took what he wrote here and he really developed it. The second mimer, Erdana, is, okay, now that we understand how vessels work, let's apply it to one of the big questions in the world. And one of the biggest questions that people have is, what does divine providence mean? Specifically, not just divine providence in general, that God runs the world, but divine providence to the point, the way that the Baal Shem Tov explained it, and which has a very strong basis in the sages, that divine providence is down to the smallest ingredient. That Hashem is aware and actively involved in every single particle.
Every leaf on every tree.
Okay. I don't know if to say every single particle, but I think that also works. In any case, so really he's taking the whole idea of the light coming down into vessels, as now he's going to apply it to a pasuk, a verse that's in our parsha, at the end of Parshas Vayeira. And there, well, no, not in the end, somewhere in the middle. And there Hashem sees the wicked actions of Sodom and Sodom and Gemmorah, as they call it. And he decides to judge them. But in order to judge them, it says, I will go down and I will see
What they're up to.
whether it is like its, really we should say, her scream, her outcry. And that's very strange. Why? Because in the verse, the full verse is Erdana Vayeira et asher asu, something like that. Like, what did Sodom and Gemmorah do in the plural? Haketzakata asher ba elai. Is it like her outcry that came to me? Why did you switch suddenly from go? I should have said I will go down to see what they're doing. So apart from the meaning of what does it mean that I'll go down, why is it that it suddenly becomes her outcry? Who is this her? So Rashi brings the medrash, because it's a very hard thing to understand in the literal meaning of the Torah, the pshat. So Rashi brings the medrash, and it means that there was a particular girl there that they had tortured because she gave tzedakah to some poor man who didn't have what to eat. Beseda. But the Alter Rebbe wants to take this in the direction of Sod, in the direction of the inner teachings of the Torah. And there the meaning is very different. And by applying now the teachings that he's just taught about kelim, about what vessels mean, and why the divine light comes down into reality in the form of vessels, it's not just the light itself. The problem that most people have is that they only envision light. They don't know how to work with vessels. By the way, this was a very common problem throughout history. There was no technology really because there was no concept of vessels. They didn't understand the value of the vessel in and of itself. And so it was very hard to understand. For instance, we talked about this once with electricity. It was hard to understand how electricity worked. To this day we don't really know. But because there was no concept of vessels really, so it just remained some unsolved mystery. And nobody realized that you can work with the vessels without understanding how the light works. And you can build everything that we build, everything we're capable of doing now, is in spite of the fact that we don't know how electricity works. But we figured out how to build vessels around it. So vessels are something that's very much missing. In Chassidus it becomes a huge deal. Because what was the whole problem with the world? That there was too much light and too little vessels. That's why the world of chaos broke. That's why the inner world of every individual breaks when they're a teenager, when they're early 20s, because there's too much light and not enough vessels. As you grow older, you have more vessels, and slowly by slowly you have less and less light actually, and you feel that. And you feel I have a lot of vessels, chaval. I have all these. I really know what I'm doing already, but there's not enough light anymore. So the whole trick is really to be youthful means to have a lot of light and few vessels. To be old is to have many vessels and few light. The whole trick is orodato bekelim detikun, is to have the lights of chaos, which were enough to break any vessel, within rectified vessels. So it's sort of like the fact that the person looks back on his life and says, if I could have been making what I make now per month when I was 20, I would have been able to do so much more. Because I have so many vessels now, I'm able to work here and work there, and I get paid for it in a decent way.
Hashem doesn't want it like that.
Maybe not. It's a good question. But at least, as you get older, you have to learn how to tap back into the lights of chaos, into the many lights that you had when you were young. And if you're able to do that, then really the last part of life is full exactly the way it was supposed to be, that there's a lot of light in a lot of vessels. Looking at this in the geopolitical context, it's exactly the problem that Yaakov had with Esav. That Esav wasn't ready. What was Esav's problem? It wasn't lights, he had enough energy. His problem was he didn't have vessels. He didn't have the right vessels to work with. And so the Jewish world has been waiting for the world to build vessels. And in many ways you could argue that the vessels that there are today are exactly seen because of technology. There's an ability for them to hear what you say. There's an ability for them to accept what we say. And the sign is that they've understood the value of vessels. What was always missing from every religion in the world? The mitzvos, the commandments. And the commandments are the vessels. That they couldn't fathom. And now, out of curiosity, I knew this was going on, but I just wanted to see what it looked like. What can we do? There's Messianic Orthodox congregations. They don't call themselves Orthodox. They call themselves Messianic Torah observant. What do they mean? Okay. So they're like Christians, but they want to be Jews. Or they cater to Jews even sometimes. Some of them are, most of them aren't. It's missionary work like any other missionary work. It's just that it's focused more on Jews. But from the time it started, like in the 70s or 80s, it's really changed a lot. And now it's become less, maybe they're still focused on Jews like they've always been, but they're beginning to enjoy themselves. It's become something for themselves. And you see that they try to do mitzvot. It's very strange. I remember in the 80s when I first came in contact with somebody who was dealing with these missionaries. He told me they had a new thing. What was their new thing? That they had tzitzis. But how did they do their tzitzis? Because they don't know what tzitzis are. So they decided, and they have to be different. So they decided you just put it on your belt. So you tie it on a belt, because it just says to tie it on your. It doesn't say that it has to be on a garment. At least that's what they think. It doesn't say. Of course, it says that, but now I saw that they all wear tzitzis, and it seems to me that they got over their first hang-up. From what I can tell, they're wearing a garment. Men and women, and they all have tzitzis out.
Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah. What is that? That's vessels. That's beginning to understand the value of vessels. Where are they going to be in 100 years? I don't know.
Turn it off for a second. Turn it off for 1 second.
I can only cover this.
One great big thing now that the lesbians have decided they have to keep ties with Mishpach.
Oh.
But it's woman to woman.
Better.
It's absolutely valueless. It doesn't mean anything. You don't really need it from woman to woman. They go to the mikveh and they make a bracha and a whole guns. So something's very mixed.
Where'd you hear that?
Oh, there's a whole junk of that is beautiful place. Really, very interesting.
I will send it to me.
Do Google on the beautiful place.
Yeah, well. Shikoyach.
I'm just saying that it's
People are
sad.
looking for vessels.
It's sad.
But people need vessels. That's what they understand.
They want to keep Torah mitzvahs, so they found a nice mitzvah, but it's a little bit like the people who say we want to keep kashrus, so we're going to do shchita and we're going to but it happens to be a pig that they're shechting, you know.
So it reminded me of your story. Your story from this Shabbos.
Okay.
What I loved about it, your dry British humor, was that he says, after he found out after a year of putting tefillin on,
Right.
you're not supposed to put tefillin on Shabbos, he says, you live, you learn. I love that. Because it was like, I couldn't even imagine that he would put tefillin on Shabbos. What, he doesn't know? And then you put it there, like he suddenly, he didn't know for a whole year. Now he knows that you're not supposed to put tefillin on Shabbos. Oh, now we can do it right. For me and you, putting tefillin on Shabbos is like exactly that, slaughtering a pig.
There wasn't even any guarantee that he was putting them on
The kosher, even who knows where he put them on.
And where the tefillin came from, but it doesn't make any difference. Because if a person decides to put on tefillin, even if they're possible, nevertheless, he is coming towards Hashem.
Okay. So in all these things, I think the common theme is that people don't know. They have warped ideas. They're not willing yet to let their mind be normalized by Chazal, by the Talmud. They don't understand the value of Torah Shebaal Peh, of the oral Torah. But they want vessels. So as crazy as they are, like in terms, but you see that they try to do all kinds of things. And strange mishmash comes out.
If you haven't sat down to learn, then how
Sure.
can you possibly ever know?
So that's what he said. You live, you learn. So eventually, if you live long enough, you'll figure it out. And we have the benefit of being more traditional. So we come with an attitude that what the sages said wasn't said out of thin air. It was said after tremendous, crazy, incredible intellectual stamina that was needed in order to figure this out. And you can't poke holes in it. You can try, but you'll come up short. Because they poked every single hole they could find into their reasoning. And it stood the test not of just 5 generations then or 50 generations then. It stood the test of the Rambam, it stood the test of Rashi, it stood the test of Rabbi Akiva Iger, it stood the test of the Ketzos, the greatest intellects in human history. It stood the test. They couldn't poke holes in it. They had questions. It's not that they understood everything. But in the end, they didn't give up. They didn't say, this is crazy. This doesn't hold. This argument doesn't hold. They understood the Talmud is true. And not just because, again, these were the types of people that you couldn't fool. You just couldn't. The Rogachover is not something that you could fool. So, if it went through all these intellects, we have the benefit of understanding what the value of the Talmud really is. There's people who don't have that tradition, so they think it's just another book. It's just writing some ideas on scripture. It's not just some ideas. Okay, anyway. So he's going to use what he taught about vessels to now understand the concept of personal divine providence. ארדנה ואראה כצעקתה. הנה הכצעקתה, ולשון נקבה, וכן הבאה אליי. ועשו, לשון נקבה, ולשון זכר, like we said, I'll go down to see what they have done. Is it like her outcry? So what they have done is plural and in the masculine. And her outcry is feminine. וגם להבין מהו ארדנה ואראה. הלא משמיים הביט השם. What does it mean that God went down and to see? He sees everything from heaven, as it were. Again, heaven is not a place, it's a symbol. אך פירושה כצעקתה, היינו הצעקה העולה מבחינת מידת הדין, שהיא בחינת מידת מלכות. Who's the outcry? Who's the her, the feminine, who is crying out here? That's the measure of judgment. And the measure of judgment, we call it a measure because it's one of the vessels into which Hashem puts His light in order to come down into reality. So the midah of the measure of judgment is also what we call kingdom. Shenikra dina de malchuta, which is called the din of the malchut, the judgment of the kingdom is the law. Rakshu dina rafia, except that the measure of judgment that comes down into the world is what we call the soft judgment. Soft judgment is sort of like duly noted. We see you. We've written down what you've done. It's sort of like a cop taking your picture. I'm not going to give you a ticket. I'm not going to do anything yet. But I know who you are. I know where you live. That's Dina Rafi. That's really the Dina de Melchuta. Dina de Melchuta. Dina means that there is order in the world. Don't think that there's no order. Don't think that things are not accountable. Everything is accountable.
Summarized in the phrase, we are watching you.
Kid. Big brother is watching you. Does it mean that he's going to come for you tomorrow? Are you going to be punished? No. But know that you're going to be, you are accountable for what you do. Melech b'mishpat yamid eretz. And that is what I think it's in the Mishlei, it says that the king uses justice to uphold his land, meaning to keep people straight, to make the land habitable, so that people can live with one another. Because if people feel that there's nothing that's going to hold them accountable, they'll eat one another. And that's why it says her outcry, because it's referring to that type of judgment. The measure of judgment that Hashem is in the world, everything is being accounted for. There's some order in it. As it says, Rachel ba'a, that she is coming. Uveu ha'inyan, So to understand this, what is this measure of judgment, and what does it mean that Hashem now has to come down to hear its outcry, to see whether what it's saying is correct? וביאור העניין, to understand this, הנה מתחילה יש להקדים לשון השגור בדברי חז"ל, גלוי וידוע לפני מי שאמר והיה עולם. We have to first understand the usual statement that the sages use to describe God's omniscience. So they use the phrase, it is revealed and known. Both revealed and known before he who said and the world came into being. Galui ve'yadua dafka. Revealed and known. Why do they have to say both revealed and known? Suppose it should have been enough to say it's revealed before. Kine. Because really, we're touching upon the subject of personal providence. Personal divine providence. The providence of God's omniscience and his involvement goes down to the details. The philosophers were unable to understand how it was even possible that the Almighty, here is talking about Aristotelian philosophy, how is it possible in any way that Hashem would have any kind of involvement, God would have, the Creator would have any kind of involvement with the details of the world.
What's the word nilu?
Nilu. Kmo nilu limtzoa petach. It's also in this week's parsha. They couldn't. Nilu means they got tired of it. Like Leah. Leah literally means a tired woman. It's very interesting that was her name. For instance, what is divine providence? Divine providence is not just that he's involved in the sense of knowing, it's also in the sense of directing. That a person cannot lift his finger if it's not proclaimed, declared from above. He has to receive permission from above. There's some kind of permission process.
What happened to free choice?
We said free choice is in your thoughts. Whether you'll be able to act this way or not, that you already need permission. And you get some kind of tremendous reward for your thoughts. That you wanted to do so and so. We see that from the fact that if a person wanted to do a mitzvah, and he wasn't able to because of the circumstances, so God connects the thought as if he did the act. He connects it with the want of the act, meaning the will and the thoughts. Those are what you have real power over. But when it comes to actions are all declared from above. The kashe lahem, it's difficult for the philosophers to understand. Kevan shu yitbarach yachid umiyuchad echad haemet. V'im ken, since God is one and unique, the true one, according to us, right? V'im ken ech yitachen yediat Hashem b'davach ha'pratim v'hashgacha pratית לתת דעתו על עניינים רבים, שהרי זה בחינת ריבוי. So how can his oneness be involved in many details? Because that would require him to split, as it were. It would require him to have multiple foci. He's here and he's there. So the sages, they wanted to address this problem that the philosophers had, because again, they were dealing with a Hellenistic, Aristotelian world. Even though the Hellenistic world was a little bit more complex, it started out pagan, and then it went through all kinds of phases, but in the end, when the sages got to it, in the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries, most of it was Aristotelian in the way that it thought, and that is the type of scientific thinking, or natural philosophy, that the sages had to deal with. And so they wanted to answer this question: how is it possible that God could be involved in multiple details and foci? With one statement, by saying it's known and it's revealed and known before. Why? Because they wanted to say because he doesn't know the way the man knows. How does man know is a davar? Man knows by first having lack of that knowledge in him, and then adding that knowledge to his repertoire. So before I didn't know this, now I know it. This is called intent in scholasticism, which is the Middle Ages version of Aristotelianism. And it means that when you think of something, your mind becomes full of that thought, which is a very good way of understanding of the experience we have. And we seem to feel that when we think of something, especially some knowledge that we didn't have before, that now our mind is filled with that knowledge, and before it was empty of that knowledge. Intentio, which is what it's called in Latin, means that there is something inside me. I have intention. It's different from how the way this word is used in modern English. In modern English, intention means kavanah, like that you have it's a purpose. That you have purpose. But intention in the scholastic world meant, and this is how the Rambam uses dat. The Rambam, when he talks about there's a yodea, there's someone who knows, there's the power of knowledge, okay, hayediah, and there's the yadua, and there's the thing that, the piece of knowledge that's entered into the mind of the knower, into the power of knowledge of the knower. So the three things, that's how they talked about it in the scholastic world. But again, this is Aristotelian, this is Aristotle's theory of thought. So they said that that's the way the man is. When he knows something, when he comes to know something, so his power of knowledge is engarbing, it's imbuing, it's putting into itself that piece of knowledge. But before, his knowledge was empty of this. So you have here a change. Before and after. Before there was nothing inside my head, now there is something inside my head. And itpalut, and there's causation from this. Something happened because I entered this new piece of knowledge into my being. And this is the same thing that people still have in terms of theories, how science develops. There was something we didn't know. Now that we know it, it causes us to change our theories, which is a beautiful theory. That doesn't work in reality. Science doesn't change because somebody learned something new. We know tons of stuff that we don't understand, and yet we don't change our theories. So that's why in the 1960s, Thomas Kuhn came up, the biggest, the first, let's call it, sociologist of science, who said that really, there's very little that knowledge can change, because people think in paradigms, and paradigms are social. They're not even a single person's construct. So for science to change its theory takes a long, long time. It has to be attacked from a million different directions, and in the end, it's a social event. It's not. Okay, it's sort of like the whole thing with the Nobel is. It's a social event because it's really talking about changing science as a social event. So the guys who changed it 30 years ago. Now it's already the accepted norm that this is how it works. But it took 30, and now now we're having the gala to show that the science has really changed. Until now we didn't know if it really changed or not. The Nobel is sort of like a big social event to show that this is now accepted. But it's not like this by God. You can't say that he was missing some knowledge. There was some piece of the world he didn't know about. He knows all the worlds, not just this one. He knows all the spiritual worlds. He knows everything. Everything is revealed before him. And all their details. ופרטיהן. אין העניין שדעתו מתלבשת ונתפסת בזה. אלא על דרך גלוי וידוע, שהכל גלוי וידוע לפניו יתברך ממילא. ואינו צריך להיות נתפס ומתלבש בדבר לידע. God doesn't need to add it into his mind for it to be known. It's known anyway. So it's galui ve'yadua. Why the yadua? You should have just said galui. It's just revealed. Because it's revealed, it's sort of like I know. Revealed would be like, there's a book here called an encyclopedia. I know it's revealed to me. I know that it's there, but until I open the book, I don't know what's going on inside. So he said, no, it's galui, it's revealed, and it's known. There's nothing in that book that he doesn't know yet. So there's nothing in the reality that God is not aware of. Aye. So now we're beginning to understand the question, what the problem is. Okay? Because this doesn't work so well with understanding what it means that he came down then. Okay? Why does he need to come down? But it does answer the problem of plurality. Because as far as God is concerned, it's not a plurality. It's not another piece of knowledge, another piece of knowledge, another person, another event, another catastrophe, whatever. It's all one for him.
Rashi has his own explanation.
What do you mean, his own explanation?
Why Shem came down.
No, okay,
It doesn't contradict, but it's a completely different approach.
I'm skipping because he's now going to say it in Memala and Soviv, and I want to get into it now. וכיוון שהוא גלוי וידוע, אין שייך כלל קושייתם שהוא בחינת ריבוי. כי זה אינו רק במין ידיעת האדם. Plurality, multiplicity, multiple foci is only an issue by man. It's not an issue by God, because there is no multiplicity there. He just knows all of it just as he knows everything. It's just one thing that he knows, from the beginning of reality to the end of reality. From the moment the world was created to the moment it'll end, before and after is all one for him. It's not like man's knowledge. Which man can only know something by enclosing that thing inside his thinking, inside his power of thought. And that's what it means when the Navi says, when the prophet says, and that's what the prophet says when he says, your thoughts are not like my thoughts. And what the Rambam says, that his thought is not like our thought. Why? Because he's all three of them, all are one. They're never separate. They're all one thing, not the way it is by man. And then every time I teach this, I say, today it's very clear. You have a disk on key that's got all the knowledge. You've got the CPU, that's the power of thought. You need to upload it, the PC itself. You need to stick the disk on key into the PC. It needs to read from it, and then it has to think about it. So you have to add it, and as long as you haven't added the disk on key in, as long as you haven't added the information in, the mind is empty. The PC is doing nothing. You have to add things into it. You have to have some storage, and you have to put that storage into it. Hashem is not like that. That's if a person can't think how in his mind, because maybe he knows everything already, so he doesn't have the experience. There's a name for it, by the way.
What's this?
I just figured it out last week. I just read about it last week. It's called Dunning something phenomena, and the two psychologists who discovered this in the 90s. That the confidence that a person has about what they know is highest when they know a tiny bit. And the more they know, the lower their confidence level in what they know.
Right.
It's amazing. It explains so much.
The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Right.
So the first step to starting to understand.
But when you start,
you know nothing.
okay. But when you start and you know something about, just a tiny bit about something, the confidence levels rise to the sky. Unbelievable. And so you get the fact that everybody knows everything about Corona, except for the people who actually know something about it. And they don't say anything. Because they know they don't know. Every topic is like that. The moment you begin to enter into it, the more you realize, like you said, that you don't know, and you're quieter.
Those who know don't talk about
right.
it. Those who talk about it don't know.
So you tried to say it's because it's like a spy game. Oh, the ones who know don't talk about it because they're very hush-hush. No, they don't talk about it because they have a lot more humility in face of the topic. They understand how complex it really is, okay? Which comes to ask, why am I teaching this? Okay? For that, Chazal said, "B'imkom she'en anashim ishtadel liot ish." If there's nobody else who's not talking, somebody has to talk. Okay, so that explains the problem with plurality. What time is it?
Time now is 9:12.
So I have to end.
Basically,
I have to end today. but we have a few more days to go over this. And
Is
since
it-
this is short, I very much want to do the long Haggah,
Okay.
which is hard,
We should have a clear week,
God willing.
unless you're going to the beach.